This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Cass Midgley and Marie Delafont.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily in two easy ways. You can pledge
$1 million
or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast, or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 228 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. I'm going to die. A big thanks to each and every one of our Patreon and PayPal supporters. Our guest today is Harold Sikkema, an artist and educator in Toronto, Canada. His roots in a Calvinist setting have shaped but not defined his path. Born to Dutch parents on a mission project in Papua, Harold grew up in a rural Ontario bubble where the Bible was inerrant, evolution was a lie, and God's covenant people sang beautiful 16th century melodies carrying the gravity of eternity. The church offered redemption and certainty, but Harold's curious spirit was never really at home with rigid structures. Encounters with ecumenical Christians in Geneva revealed a broader stream of life, while readings in philosophy, science, and the arts called into question the historical and ethical claims of literal religion. It was freeing to see the Bible and its interpretation as a creative human production, but also challenging to carry new insights into the tightly woven fabric of faith, tradition, and family. In artistic practice, Harold explored new patterns and processes, a more critical thinking, seeing, and making. But art in the church remained suspicious. Comfortable with dissonance, Harold saw that the creative tension in religion could be productive. Nevertheless, the anger stirred by creationist deception, patriarchal insistence, damaging dogma, and purity culture made it difficult to stay. Today, Harold is grateful for what wisdom has wound its way through the fray. He teaches college courses in design and code while developing spiral images from processed digital video. He enjoys cat fostering and cooking with his partner Deborah. Curiosity, he says, is the original spin. We had some technical difficulties with Marie's microphone, and she doesn't chime in until the 13-minute mark. We were still working out the kinks. Speaking of Marie, here's her opening monologue.
Hello there, listener. Marie Delafont here, doing my first ever monologue. It's gonna be crazy awesome, super insightful, gonna change your fucking life, so buckle up. First, I want to briefly talk about my experience thus far managing and co-hosting Everyone's Agnostic. I started managing the podcast in the middle of October 2018, and I joined as a co-host in November 2018. How am I doing, you ask from the other side of iTunes? Well, I think I'm finally getting into the swing of things. I feel like I've gotten to know Cass well enough, and I'm feeling pretty safe to be myself. And I'm also pretty starstruck. That might not be the right term, but I've just been a huge fan of this show for 2 years, and I've always wanted to be part of it or something similar where I could use my voice to heal myself and to empower others to do the same. Needless to say, this podcast has been a perfect fit for me, and I only wish that it was a full-time job with pay. Initially, I felt extremely vulnerable and unsure of myself and my voice, but with Cass's encouragement and my sense of self that appears to be developing at an exponential pace, I'm really settling into it. For a long time, I've wanted a number of things in my life. a place to share my story, to recover from religion, to help others recover from religion, to be regularly intellectually challenged, and to feel a profound sense of purpose. Being on this podcast checks off all those boxes for me, and every day that goes by that I'm involved in this, I'm in a state of grateful disbelief. I also am so happy to be working with Cass because he's someone I see as imperfect, yet self-aware and thirsty to grow and to be challenged, which I see as such an authentic way to be human. His value of honesty really resounds with my own, and so it's easy to work with him, even when he just responds to my verbose messages with a thumbs up emoji. I feel energized and I'm excited for all that is to come. So Cass and I have been making a push to guest appear in other similar podcasts to ours so that we can spread the gospel of saying, I don't know. We encourage you to go check those out. There are a few that have already been released. Cass has appeared on Recovering from Religion and Waiting for Wrath. Marie has appeared on Atheist Talk. Check them out. Plus, we have a lot of more guest appearances scheduled for the future. Here are just a few that will be recorded in the next couple of months. Keep an eye out for them. Marie is going to be on Embrace the Void. Cass will be on Voices of Deconversion. Cass will also be on Wayward Willis. And he will be on Minnesota Trans Atheist, Your Atheist Pastor, Atheist Nomads, and Marie will be on Women Beyond Faith. And another exciting announcement is that we now have merch. That's merchandise for you old folks. Listeners Christy and Bonnie designed some 3-inch and 2-inch Say Yes to What Is stickers. They are $5 for 2 large and 3 small stickers, and that price includes the delivery in the U.S. So to see what they look like, navigate to our website at everyone'sagnostic.com and click on merch. To make your order, email us at everyone'sagnostic@gmail.com and we will hook you up. Note that if you have been interested in becoming a Patreon supporter of the podcast, sign up today because all Patreon contributors will be getting a sticker for free. So now on to some things that have been on my mind. This week, I have been thinking about death again. Those who know me know that death and sexuality are 2 of my favorite topics in the world to talk about. Least favorite topics? Traffic, the weather, and what day of the week it is. Yes, Linda, I know it's Wednesday. A few weeks ago, my partners and my cat, Papua, started getting really sick. We finally brought her into the vet, and long story short, we had to bring her to the hospital because she had stopped eating, drinking, moving, and didn't want to be near anyone or be touched. Now, we don't have kids by choice, but we do have 2 cats, and seeing Papua so gravely sick caused me to reflect on life and how we're not guaranteed anything. Often we say that when we are referring to humans, but I've been challenged lately to look beyond our species in the same way that I've been challenged to put humanity into the same box with all other beings in this universe. None of us are guaranteed anything in life. And maybe as a species that knows that we're going to die, we are then the only species to create religion, to try to guarantee ourselves of something. And more on my journey, I accept that that isn't true. Instead, as I fed my cat through her feeding tube, I considered that the most that we can hope for in life is minimal suffering and maximum love or pleasure. Hedonism? Maybe. And unsure whether my cat is going to survive this, I've been comforting myself knowing that she enjoyed her life. Rarely was she in pain, and often she was getting belly scratches. And I zoom out even further and I apply the same to myself. I am not guaranteed anything in my life. None of us are. And that's where, for me, saying yes to what is kicks in. Yes, my cat is sick. Yes, her health crisis cost us $3,000. Yes, I love her enough to pay that money. Yes, I'm a crazy cat lady. Yes, I am aging. Yes, I'm going to die. Yes, I may suffer. And also, yes, head scratches feel amazing. Yes, being high is fantastic. Yes, connecting heart to heart with friends is so satisfying. Yes, seeing my partner worry over and love our little mammals is so heartwarming. Yes, dancing floods me with endorphins. There's so much pleasure to be had in life and so much pain as well. I say yes to both because they are what is. I was listening to Sunday School Dropouts podcast where two non-believers read the Bible, and they had read Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. It's a book that posits that maybe it's better to have never been born at all. Maybe. But I was born. And here we find myself, as Cass says. In closing, I'd like to share with you this clip from a Scottish show on Netflix called Burna Stone.
What can I get you?
Can I have a double cheeseburger meal, please? With a banana milkshake.
Anything else?
Big tasty meal. Large. With Diet Coke.
Anything else? Anything else? Anything else?
No!
Anything else? Anything else?
Sorry, I just remembered about death there. Mozzarella dippers as well, please. And an apple pie. That's all.
Hit the next window.
Hey.
And that's it for me, you guys. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And as a reminder, you can email us at the show at everyone'sagnostic@gmail.com. And why would you do such a thing? Maybe you want to be a guest in the future. Maybe you have a suggestion for a guest for us. Maybe you have a podcast that you'd like to have us come on. Maybe you'd like to order some merchandise. Maybe you'd like to join our online Facebook private community group. They're going to be having an open support space during Christmas Eve Day and Christmas for those of us who find that to be a very stressful time. Or maybe you have some fan art that you'd like to send our way. Do it! And so finally, before we dive into our episode with Harold Sikkema, I want to quickly note that for this recording, I had some serious audio issues, so you will notice I don't say quite as much because my track was creating a lot of static. Since this recording, we have figured out our audio setup, so thanks for saying yes to technical difficulties. Love, Marie.
Before we get into our talk with Harold, I want to share some thoughts. Before I went into grad school, I hadn't had much exposure to Stoicism, but the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. In general, it means the endurance of pain or hardship without a display of feelings and without complaint. This appealed to me because I'd been a person that overreacted my whole life. I see overreacting as a manifestation of immaturity. It's the equivalent of a child throwing a tantrum, where the event does not merit the reaction. For example, a stoplight turns red as the driver approaches, and he bangs on the steering wheel and cusses. This is an overreaction and solves nothing. It's even more logically irrational when there's zero urgency to where the driver is headed. Stoicism is predominantly a philosophy of personal ethics informed by its system of logic and its views on the natural world. It's entirely illogical and unproductive to hit the steering wheel. The stoplight doesn't care. That said, part of the work I've done to aid my personal maturation is to adopt some stoicism, while at the same time not judging or condemning myself for being an emotional creature. It's human to have and express emotions. It does not make a person evil if they are a rager or an overreactor. They simply lack self-control. And it should not define them. We are not what we do. Plus, I don't want to be so stoic that I don't feel anything. I want to feel everything I've ever felt, just exercise more control over what I do with it. Stoicism is a form of saying yes to what is. It holds that the path to happiness is found in accepting the moment as it presents itself, by not allowing oneself to be controlled by either the desire for pleasure or the fear of pain. It's Nietzsche's amor fati. It's not wishing anything were different, but getting busy solving the problem. Stoicism is using one's mind to understand the world and to do one's part to align with nature's outworkings, to see oneself as a part of the world, both a part of the problem and a part of the solution, and owning both where necessary. I think Stoicism can develop naturally just by the progression of time in one's life, if one is self-aware. The older we get, the more conservative we are with our fucks. We know that we have a limited amount of fucks to give, and we pick our battles better. Our emotions and actions align more and more with reality and logic, and not fantasy or self-delusion. Life is hard. That's the truth, of course. Religions and magical thinking, like everything happens for a reason or presuming that life is happening according to a grand intelligent plan, contribute to tantrums. Expectations and entitlement spoil moments and actually drain our lives of joy and beauty. Ironically, when one acknowledges the horrid, careless nature of life, one can be surprised by the genuine joy and beauty that is hidden in our experiences. If I'm dishonest with myself about the evil that dominates this life, the joy and beauty I think I'm experiencing is less real, and the bold and brave will never settle for it. We taped this conversation on November 18th, 2018. The intro music is by Dave Weckl called Just Groove Me. The segue music on this episode is by Sam Mayer on a handpan in the New York City subway. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. So, Harold, did you have a religious upbringing? Like your parents religious?
Very much so. I was brought up in a Calvinist environment. Mm-hmm. You're aware of what they call the tulip, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's incidentally a Dutch image, which is also part of my background. So we're talking about immigrants from the Netherlands who came to Canada and who kind of insisted on maintaining their own particular traditions.
Yeah.
So they formed their communities and schools. And the church community is the Canadian Reformed church that I grew up in.
Well, even as an evangelical, we used to have somewhat, we would say I'm a 3 out of 5 tulip, or something,
Yeah, the other petals blew away or something.
So T is total depravity. I just looked it up. U, unconditional election. L, limited atonement. I, irresistible grace. P, preservation of the saints. So were you a 5-point Calvinist?
Oh, and interesting how you said preservation. In our world, it was the perseverance.
Oh, well, this website that I looked up, you're right. And that's right. It is perseverance. Not the way this thing spelled it on this website. It says preservation. But now that I'm remembering, it was perseverance of the saints. It has nothing to do with preservation. That's probably an error. You know what? Sometimes the internet's wrong. Did you know this?
Well, if you find it on the internet, it must be true, right?
Yeah, that's my point. Okay, so you were a Calvinist. In fact, and you were devout. And I think, what started to happen where you began to listen to your doubts, your skepticism?
Well, we were quite immersed in this world, and it was I would say, a happy place for the most part.
Yeah.
And so the need to be skeptical didn't arise for quite some time. why would you question something that's working?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's actually a lot of positives there. It was a good place to grow up and to be in so many ways, and a lot of great community, a connection between the church and the school and the home was really emphasized, sort of a triangle, and a sense of belonging. So in that setting, you would have covenant theology. So like the Presbyterians, they would baptize their kids. If you grow up in that environment, you're told that, you're in a place of privilege. And so you have that mindset from the beginning.
Yeah. And it's just the water you're swimming in. I mean,
Exactly.
You got any siblings?
Yes. I have an older brother and younger siblings. My older brother and I have traveled more. So he and I were born in Indonesia during a mission project that my parents were involved in. My younger siblings, they grew up more in Ontario here in Canada. So we have different experiences. And so my older brother and I have not maintained the same, let's say, commitment to the community. Hasn't been possible for us.
Yeah.
But the younger siblings are still active in their churches, as are my parents.
So is there any angst or animosity in your family regarding religion? Is it a subject that's taboo?
Well, it's certainly an uneasy thing.
Yeah.
There's so many layers to it. I mean, my parents really invested so much into that world, including, let's say, Christian education. My father is a lifelong educator. And so, teaching covenant children to be obedient to the Lord, so to speak. And that's a financial as well as an emotional commitment.
Is that how he makes a living?
Yeah, it is. And he's kind of worked his way through that system. And now he's teaching other teachers to teach, if you will. So, but within that covenantal paradigm. So that means that the system is very much part of the assumed. It's like the water we're swimming in, like you said. Yeah. And so that makes it a challenging terrain.
Yeah. Have they ever conveyed to you that they wish you would come back to the faith?
Yes and no. I think my mother in particular conveys that when she can. My father is a little more open about understanding, there's a journey and so on, he would say.
Well, was it, I guess in the Calvinism world, they consider you still saved, right? I mean,
that's a good question. Once saved, always saved.
Well, an irresistible grace or preservation of the saints. I mean, just, and I guess they might not know because they can't know the mind of God, which person he chooses and which he doesn't. And so maybe the fact that you left the faith is evidence that you never were chosen.
Yeah, so it's a system. It's an attempt to create some order out of a narrative.
Yeah.
And so it's a way of making rigid something that is impossible actually to classify or to force that coherence onto the world. It just doesn't really work. And so inevitably when you build a system like that, I suppose you do run into trouble.
Of course, that's the definition of a religion, and certainly the main purpose of a religion, to give order to what is otherwise chaos, make people feel safe.
Yeah, and I think maybe it serves that purpose quite well. Evolutionarily speaking, it's helped people along.
Exactly. The majority of the world have bought in, so yeah, it's working. All right, so let me talk. I've been, looking over your bio and such, and we say all the time, I might have even already said it in this interview, that talk about when you lost your faith, the word lost. And you kind of have some thoughts around that, the usage of that word.
Oh, yeah. So there certainly is loss involved, that you lose certain relationships and connections, or you lose access to opportunity. But I think if you frame the loss of faith as, like, if you internalize that language, the other way to look at it is that you're gaining something. And I would say that, like, if you're learning and growing, that's not necessarily a loss.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so, like, I would think about, what do we mean by faith?
Yeah.
So perhaps faith it's a posture that you hold towards the future. Maybe you're anticipating, or you're eager, or you're confident, and maybe that confidence has an object that you would call God, or you could just stay a little more grounded and look at the specific things going on around you and see specific people and places and things that you're excited by.
Yeah.
And so it's an optimistic orientation towards the future, I think. And that's not something I've lost at all. If anything, it's grown and developed.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly not the evangelical definition of faith. I mean, they would take Hebrews 13 and come from there, which is believing in something that they cannot see, and having, like you said, the confidence in an object or in a doctrine, even in the face of contrary evidence.
I tend to look at that, like, if I give that verse a generous reading, right? Of course, you can make it mean a lot of things, including this, like, fear of the evidence. But you're free to interpret it how you like.
Sure. Yeah.
If I give it my own reading, I don't see a problem with. I don't see a problem with it. Yeah. It's the future is unknown, strictly speaking, but you can adopt a confident posture towards it.
Yeah.
And
well, if I might say so, you're a bit naive, Harold, about evangelicalism, because what you just said was, oh, you're free to interpret it just as you want. And of course, you and I know that because we're free thinkers. But an evangelical, a pastor will stand at the pulpit and wag his finger at the congregation and say the exact opposite. You do not get to interpret this as you wishy-washy feel like, or what gives you goosebumps, or what you think is true. The Bible is the word of God. You know where I'm going.
Well, yeah, I've experienced that kind of message firsthand.
Yeah.
And so, well, if I think about how, let's say, Calvinism relates to evangelicalism, Calvinism is also authoritarian. And in this particular flavor, perhaps especially where there was a reluctance among this community to join with, let's say, the more liberal, reformed branches, because they wanted to hold to the Bible as inerrant. And so you've got this, well, it's been called the paper pope, right? It's like, it says in the Bible, therefore it must be true.
Yeah. All right, well, let's shift gears. And Harold, out of all the bullet points, I mean, you sent not only your bio, but like a massive 6-page, or no, it's not quite 6 pages, but, well, you're an academic and an artist both. And so where do you teach again?
I teach design courses and also programming databases. It meshes really nicely with an art practice to be teaching in interaction design.
So, looking at your points, there was one that caught my eye, something about gender equality. Where I lost it, but do you know what I'm talking about?
I think it's under gender injustice, maybe?
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
The people who step up onto pulpits are of a certain caliber, or people of a certain kind.
Yeah.
And they're always men in this setting. And the people who have power and who make decisions are men. And so in the church community, there's no real value placed on equality. And so the claim, I suppose, is that this is what the Bible recommends. But it causes a lot of pain and hurt. And it's a form of injustice. I mean, it's a patriarchal power structure, but it's an oppressive structure. So you can't express yourself with a good conscience when others are excluded from the opportunity to express themselves.
Yeah.
And that doesn't sit well. And so there was a moment when I realized that it wasn't ethical to stick around because it wasn't possible to reform that system given the assumptions it was based on.
I like that you were able to notice that, because I know that a common thing that happens is that if there is some kind of repression or injustice, usually those in power are not the first ones to see it or the ones to be people to stand up against it if they're the ones benefiting from it, or at least aren't being affected by it. So like it sticks out to me that you saw that as a man and still and said that was not okay.
Well, I think it hurts men as well that they are assumed to fit into this kind of power escalator. It doesn't offer them the freedom to be themselves. Not everybody who is a man is therefore cut out for leadership or for the kinds of things that are assumed within that role.
Good point.
So it isn't fair to anybody that this structure imposes a role on people. So it's a kind of act of violence, I would say. We're not listening to people as they are.
Have you done any exploration around the concept of toxic masculinity? And if so, like, what's your impression around that?
Yeah, I dove into that a little bit during grad school, especially because I have friends who were exploring that in their own academic work. And I was introduced to bell hooks, so I was reading some of her writing. And certainly that is an interesting term, toxic masculinity. I see it being used in a lot of ways. And there's certainly toxicity in how we make assumptions about gender roles. And that's certainly harmful.
Or it's weaponized sometimes.
That's it. People throw labels around and then it becomes like a new banner to flock to. So maybe I need to read more about the analysis and.
Well, I have something I want to share. Get y'all's reactions because my wife and I were flipping around the TV last night and stumbled onto the movie Taken with Liam Neeson.
I have a certain set of skills.
Yeah, right. That's the famous catchphrase. The central theme of the movie is a dad is trying to rescue his daughter who's been kidnapped into sex trafficking. I don't know. I had this little epiphany, and I'm embarrassed to say that it was an epiphany because it's going to sound obvious to everybody listening. But it was like, wow, there's just like this giant multi-million-dollar industry, both legal, like just sex work, and that's legal and voluntary of the women. And then there's this forced illegal shit. And I'm sitting there, this is much ado about the vagina. And I just turned to my wife and I said, has it ever occurred to you that like this world is ape shit about what's between your legs? And she's like, yeah, duh. It's like, so I didn't really follow up with questions, but I would, if I would have, I would have said, do you walk around like knowing that you have like an atomic bomb between your legs? I mean, probably the most powerful thing in the world, I guess. I don't know. But as a man, it was just like, I don't know what that feels like to be watching a movie where there's all this much ado, and it's all about these men who will go to great lengths both to exploit and make money and fuck and be with and all of just the woman. And I think we've I know it's been said before or theorized before that men are so protective of their power and keep women down because of this very thing that men know at least this much, that women are the most powerful gender on the earth. And if we're going to be powerful, we've got to keep them down. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Any reactions to any of that? Either one of you?
Harold?
Well, so I'm thinking about, well, how do we tell a story about that we can kind of live with and carry forward? And so this is a powerful part of being human. And so what you have on offer in the church is like, well, my father used to talk about the cultural mandate a lot, be fruitful and multiply, so to speak. And it's framed as this kind of imperative that there's this model for how to be a sexual human being. And then you're kind of ushered into this particular role. But then is that power going to be contained by a single story? You know, people are complex.
Yeah.
So even if the narrative is compelling and works for a lot of people, there's more to being a sexual human being than one story will allow.
Yeah.
And so there's something there, I guess, about opening up the possibility of storytelling and just listening to people's experiences and taking them seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
So I don't know, Marie, if you have a reflection on that.
Give it to us.
No, I'm not holding anything back. I'm still putting my thoughts together. I don't know whether to respond to Harold or to Cass, but like altogether, I guess my thought is like, I don't think that women nor men have any intrinsic power. I think I don't know. It's just we're just fucking apes. Like I don't think there's a lot more meaning than that.
Yeah, but apes, I think that's, in a way, that's where power came from, is that, there is, in a very primal way, there is a battle for power, king of the hill, alpha, beta. And it's sad that we've inherited that, and that, I mean, it's not sad. It's why we're here. It's why our DNA survived.
Right.
But one thing about our society, and all the way up to the President of the United States currently, is that we are so non-self-aware of those things and how we can supersede them with the prefrontal cortex and actually take the high road and decide that, okay, in this 21st century, that primal and reptilian brain impulse is not necessarily how I relate to the other gender. And so people are still responding to that power. But like you're suggesting, is it, boy, it'd be great if we didn't give a fuck.
Yeah, I mean, the more I explore feminism and patriarchy and stuff, the more I don't arrive into a position of women are more powerful, or like there's this really underlying narrative, like Harold's saying, of women actually having the power because we have vaginas and men want them. I mean, the more I learn about this stuff, the more I see that we are equals all around, men, women. I don't know. It's a half-baked thought right now, and I haven't had the coffee that Cass has, but I don't know. That's where I keep coming back, that just a more universal look at humanity at large, instead of subscribing to narratives around the division and the differences between sexes. I don't know.
Any thoughts, Harold?
Yeah, so that there's a valuing there of equality that I would share. So at the same time, we're all individuals and we come into the world with uniqueness, maybe genetically or
right,
culturally, or in so many ways. You can choose to grapple with that in your own way, or you can like find a script that someone else wrote and lean into it.
Yeah.
Or like you have so many choices, maybe more than many humans ever had.
Yeah.
If you find yourself with the freedom to choose your narrative, that's probably a point of privilege.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to shift gears. Are you married, Harold?
I'm partnered with Deborah.
Okay.
We have been living in Toronto here for a couple of years. So we met in grad school. My model for that is, I've learned a lot about loyalty and partnership from my parents, who have been married for many decades, and my grandparents also. So irrespective of whatever religious narrative underlies it, people are still capable of building strong relationships. So there's a lot I've learned from them, even if I don't subscribe to the same institution or the same paradigm that they do.
So I read your bio. One of the things that stuck out to me that I was curious to hear more about is under the topic about how you announced that you were going to be moving in with your partner, Deborah, and that you took a poetic email approach, which backfired. I am so curious about this. Can you tell me what happened?
Well, the timing wasn't ideal. My parents were on holiday. We just kind of needed to sort out what we were going to do. I was well aware that it wasn't going to be an easy thing to communicate. And so I was also working through that myself, trying to figure out if there was some narrative structure that I was going to employ to ground my understanding of partnership.
Yeah.
You know, if the script wasn't working for me, what was going to be the alternative?
Yeah.
So I almost, like, as an artist, I needed to give it some poetic grounding. But that wasn't what my family needed. They needed clarity and a different kind of communication. I was meeting my own needs more than theirs in that moment. But it wasn't like I necessarily had a choice. I think it was something that I needed to do either way.
Yeah.
And it wasn't going to be pretty either way.
No, I think, well, the way I look at it, I suppose, is that I was given...
Are we talking about your parents would be disappointed that you were going to shack up and not get married, like for religious reasons?
I think they were set up to be disappointed by the system that they were assuming.
Right, yeah. You walked right into that. So there wasn't going to be an easy way to do this, but it was imposed on you, and so it's not your fault.
Yeah, so it was pointed out to me that, if I wanted to look for a partner outside of the very small conservative clique that we belonged to, I did have a few options, because even though it was a fairly insular group, they were ecumenical enough to form alliances with other conservative churches. And so, from their point of view, I had this freedom to go out and explore the world, which I suppose was a bit wider if you included those other communities as well.
Yeah.
But essentially, I was told, this is your sandbox, and that's kind of these are the boundaries.
Yeah.
And so, of the 7 billion people on the planet, here are the 40,000 that you may opt to enter into relationship with. Everyone else is like suspect, right? And so if those are your boundaries, then, well, for me, it was a question of, hey, that's probably not going to work, so I may as well do something else. And so for a long while, I would direct that energy into art practice, because I didn't want to disrupt these ideals that my family held about purity and so on, because I think those are valuable in a sense, and they're, again, giving it a generous reading, you can see where maybe those ideals would come from, but they don't serve everybody. So I did spend a good number of years kind of sidestepping the question, but it wasn't healthy.
Yeah.
And so the system, by being rigid, was, I think, inviting these kinds of conflicts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we were never very good at talking about them, because it was assumed always that, the Bible had the right answer. Any kind of a discussion would imply that, well, it was up for debate, And we weren't going to have a debate because the Bible said this and this and this.
Yep.
It's not open to discussion.
So did you ever feel any guilt or shame as you were, because it sounded like you were already exploring the idea that you didn't agree with these concepts or beliefs, but you kind of kept it to yourself, but and then began to explore it through art. But did you ever struggle with like shame or guilt with not being on board with that? Or was it just kind of this logical step that this belief system doesn't work for me and I'm going to move away from it?
It was both of those things. And I think guilt happens to everybody. It's just a question of like what your paradigm is.
Yeah.
So now you have feminist guilt, or you have this guilt or that. Like you end up feeling guilty either way. It's just human. And so Calvinist guilt might be particularly insidious. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like, what do you compare it with?
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so, for sure, if your community is casting this vision that you aren't aligning with, then those kind of feelings arise. To be honest, it took me a long while to make that connection and realize that actually it was affecting me personally quite negatively. It was diminishing my ability to connect authentically with other people.
Well, speaking of connect with other people, I mean, on this show, you mentioned it yourself that your experience in the church, especially as a child and growing up, was pleasant. It was a community. It was good. And
Oh, yeah.
there was no reason to be cynical or skeptical about it because it was working.
Well, there's so much love there and so much, connection. And so how does that happen? Well, I suppose it's a shared struggle or a shared narrative, or so, like people have in common this theology, I suppose.
Do you have that now in your life? I mean, do you have a community of love in your life?
There's so much love in my life now.
Okay.
It feels less forced.
But how do you meet these people?
Like these people. Well, some people go to these like Oasis type things, and Oasis has a thing here in Toronto.
Okay, yeah.
It always felt really churchy to me. I only kind of went once. I know you like to build community casts, but like, what do you build community around? So my feeling is that I don't need an ultimate community. I like the church is posturing as this community that gathers around ultimate reality or something, which like maybe that's valuable, but I don't have any ultimate claims to make. So I'm going to stick to what I know, which is perhaps art and education and like the spheres that I am familiar with, my friends, the neighbors in my building, the people you encounter. And so you establish connections and they're meaningful. But I don't have this sense of urgency that I need to somehow gather all those people under one roof to sing Kumbaya.
Yeah, I think I remember reading in your bio, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically what you said, that you like to build your community more in spheres of interest. Like I think you wrote maybe like yoga and like some other things. Is that right?
I think it's much healthier to give your relationships a specific context instead of this aggrandizing, like overarching be all and end all type of structure. It's temporary anyway, so just enjoy the local expressions of community that you can participate in. Whether it is, I don't do as much fitness as Deborah, but we find ways of participating in those kinds of community. And that's great. So you build friendships through work. Like I do some consulting with an arts school aside from my teaching work. There's just so many fabulous people there, whether they're teaching dance or painters or... No, I don't have any trouble meeting people. I'm fairly outgoing, though on some days I'm an introvert. And it kind of ebbs and flows.
Yeah, I get that.
Can you tell me, as a person who used to be, well, I don't know if I want to use these words, but I'm going to use them for lack of a better word, but I used to be pretty creative as a kid, like doing stereotypical things like
Crafts.
Yeah, crafts, writing stories, painting. Like I was known, like I was renowned, and like my peers would ask me to draw them pictures because I was like a spot on for drawing Garfield and Odie. And I was pretty legit at the time. And then I kind of came of age and kind of came into that place where you start having shame and you start wanting to be approved of by your peers, by the people around you. And I started backing away from creativity and stopped going to art classes, stopped doing all that stuff. And this is all to say, like, you know, since I stopped that, which was probably like freshman year of high school, I've been working really hard on like rediscovering creativity, the expression of creativity without any shame or judgment. imposed on it. And so when I come across people like yourself who like career artists, I'm always curious, how you got yourself there, what sustains you, what drives you about the art that you do. Is it, I don't know. I'm just really curious to hear about what your experience and what your meaning is as an artist, and maybe in particular, like how being a formerly religious person plays into how you became to be an artist, and how, like, in the kind of art that you produce. I'm sorry, that's a long question. I hope you got it all.
That's a really, like, there are layers that you've been articulating that I appreciate, and you're clearly sensitive to like what's at stake. And I like that. So initially I would try to integrate the art practice with the Christianity. And so, of course, in the scriptures, there are loads of metaphors and ideas and things that you can play with artistically. And to an extent that was encouraged because, the Bible was full of poetry as well. So
Yeah.
God approves of that. But then it became a question of, well, are you using your art for God or something like that? So it became propaganda. Like, are you using your art to bring people to God?
Yeah.
And so if it doesn't have your own voice in it, like if you're just creating for this other system or agenda, it's not really you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was an artistic conversation I was having with the text. I started making these collage works that were responding to theological ideas, just because that was the water, the inspiration I was swimming in. And so I wasn't taking the texts literally, but aesthetically. I was exploring, that story of Elijah where God shows up in the whisper and not in the storm?
Yeah.
So in design, you would talk about the visual weight of something. If you have a lot of noise, it draws the eye, but then you also have like the white space. And so I was making these analogies with theology and aesthetics. But I kept all of the Christianese, like the language was in there. And so in art school, I ran into these people who were critical of that. They were like, why are you still clinging to these superstitious ideas? I wasn't necessarily treating them as superstitions, but they were a starting point for a conversation. And that conversation just kept going. And I still find the Bible to be a productive space in terms of language. Northrop Frye was someone who helped me see that. So looking at the Bible through the lens of English literature.
Who did you say helped you?
Northrop Frye. He's a Canadian literary critic. He wrote a book called Words with Power. You can look up his lectures. I think the University of Toronto has got them up on there. You might like that. You might like to look that up.
So did you sit under his teaching personally or just read his books?
No, I watched his videos.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
This happened decades ago. So
yeah,
I was behind it. I thought of myself as behind the curve. I had catching up to do in so many areas, including pop culture.
Wow.
Like we didn't have a television, see?
Oh my.
And so I grow up with this propensity to go out into the woods and build forts with my friends. Because what else do you do when there's no cartoons? But so I go into university not knowing like who the Beatles are.
Oh my gosh.
And so like I had to catch up. And that was actually a lot of fun, but also terrifying.
Yeah. How old are you now?
I'm 33.
Okay. So the protective subculture that you grew up in, that was again an extension of their religious beliefs?
It's hard to say. It wasn't as if these things were like outright condemned or something. It would be hard to pin down where that sentiment originates. Yeah. People have pointed out to me that I'm not the only one who experienced this, where there's like, you see the devil behind every rock. And so you have this fearful mentality. But I don't think of my parents as being fearful. They were just looking out for us the best way they knew how. It's not really their fault that they were using misinformed resources. But, I don't know. Even that sounds too accusatory. It's like, that's just the world we were in. So it's natural to draw boundaries between what works and what doesn't. And so actually the negative space or the white space of not having had to endure so much noise from pop culture is something that maybe shaped my art practice positively as well.
Huh. So can I ask about your partner Deborah? I'm curious, like if she has a background of religion or anything, or if that was something that you two had in common when you met.
Yeah, it was something we had in common.
She was also formerly religious?
Yeah, Deborah's from Brazil. Her last name is Jesus, which is funny because
No way.
like,
Jesus.
well, Jesus would be like Spanish, but in Portuguese, which is spoken in Brazil.
So how do they pronounce it in Portuguese?
Pretty much the same way we do. I mean, it's
okay.
slightly different, but.
And did she grow up Catholic then?
It's interesting in Brazil because you have Catholicism, which was there for quite a while, but evangelical Christianity has started to take root. And the newly elected president in Brazil has really tapped into that evangelical bloc. It's like the Brazilian Trump, which is depressing. But anyway, that's context for the point, which is that you have a lot of these Assemblies of God type churches. So in her background, her parents were not both religious at the beginning, but then you had Jehovah's Witness phase for a while, and then Assemblies of God, which they're now both involved in. It was interesting to visit there and experience their approach to kind of community and prayer and so on.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had been down there.
Yeah, I visited Sao Paulo with Deborah last year.
Huh. Can I ask how long you and Deborah have been together?
So 2015.
Okay.
Yeah, we met in grad school.
So how did her parents' community? How did they approach community in a different way that stuck out to you?
Well, Calvinists are quite cerebral. That doesn't mean they're logical in every instance. It just means that their practice is like text-based rather than expressive. Well, it wasn't the first time I had encountered this kind of hands in the air type of laying on of hands prayer scenario, because I had been to other places like in Montreal where people were just being whipped into a frenzy by the music and the drums and just this kind of trippy religious thing. And
very trancy stuff.
Well, this was mild by comparison to what I experienced in Montreal, but just...
Oh, really?
I experienced it as a kind of oppressive thing because it's like, well, it's supposed to be a blessing of some kind. Like we're sending you on your way with God's grace or something.
Yeah.
But it's just this kind of insistent, loud clamor to my ears. And it robs people of their own agency, I suppose. Because like God gets all the credit for... Deborah worked really hard to get to Canada. She's a permanent resident here. She did the master's degree here and she was able to stay. And that isn't because like she had some kind of blessing from God. It's because she worked really hard.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
When there's this prayer, it just kind of takes the focus off of what's really going on.
Yeah.
It's like magical thinking. So like I would rather live in the real world, so to speak. And I suppose Deborah would feel the same way.
So has she found it, because like the sense I get from you is that maybe it wasn't super traumatic to come out of your religious roots. It feels like you found a lot of meaning and haven't even discarded all of it. It still feels like you still find a lot of value in like the Bible and stuff, word wise. So I guess my question is, I'm just wondering, like, does your partner, like, did she have a similar kind of healing, like a amicable departure from her faith, or did she have a different? And I'm not asking the question great, but do you know what I mean?
Well, like what I learned from Deborah was that it's healthy sometimes to put in place clear boundaries of separation where you say, no, this is not what I want.
Yeah.
I was always on this wavelength of why can't it be both? And that's the creative approach to build a bridge or to say, we can have this and we can have this. And so that, for myself, was spurring the theological and artistic exploration. Like, the creative parameters are, you have this community that takes the Bible as inerrant. How can I make this work? There's got to be a way where it could be both and. It's like a video game where you're presented with a challenge. But, it might just be healthier to say, no, I'm moving on from that. I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying she did?
Yeah, she has no problem saying no.
Yeah. Well, and bringing closure, whereas you kind of leave it open-ended.
That's right.
Okay.
And I suppose there's pros and cons.
Yeah.
there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's just personality, like you said. What you said a second ago about the more expressive and emotional side of Christianity and the less cerebral, you said it felt to you like it was oppressive, and just as one coming out of that, and especially we were talking about the context of this clamorous Sunday morning hoopla and emotional flagellation, almost.
Yeah.
To create an experience. And I'm telling you, as one who did that from within, we thought we were all about freedom. I mean, we literally were like, we'd sing songs where we'd, say the word freedom over and over again.
Well, it felt like freedom for a while, because so within Calvinism, there are people who feel like, well, maybe we need some more emotion here. And so in my context, there were, particularly among young people, movements towards what you would call evangelical music. So we were like grounded in these 16th century melodies that the community was quite proud of. Like, we're stewarding this music through time. And so who are you to then go and play guitars and drums? That's offensive to. So it was a point of rebellion to play Rich Mullins or somebody like that.
Yeah.
But I was like at the forefront of this, because in our youth group, I would be like, I had the guitar and the drums, and I would switch between those two, and I would play these emotionally laden songs, and the critique was already there from the older generation. They were like, don't trust your emotions.
Yeah, right.
And, they were right, but for the wrong reasons, perhaps. Well, it's not like trusting in a Bronze Age text is any better of an idea.
Superior. Right.
Yeah.
I found so many holes in that theology that it's all emotionally driven in the end. This is created by human beings.
It is. Yeah.
All right. So, Harold, you get out of the house and you begin a journey into discovering what's going on in the real world, like the Beatles and such. But did you, I'm curious, I want to make some reference to Star Trek, because I think that you're a Vulcan, and I think but if I were to refer to you as a Vulcan, would you have the context to know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm not a Trekkie. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Someday I'll immerse myself in that. Like I said, I have this catching up to do, so I'll do it.
Well, whatever. I'm just saying that the Vulcans are a very stoic race, and the thing that I'm hearing and feeling is that if there were a meter or some kind of gauge that showed the emotional swings, and my gauge was put up beside yours, there's this your needle is barely moving. We could be watching the same horror movie or watching, something that is supposed to stimulate emotions, and your needle is just twitching a little bit, and mine's going swinging, right and left, and it comes out in the way you talk and think, the cadence at which you talk. Imagine your students in your class have had to adjust to your cadence, like I am right now on this show.
Well, cadence is a funny thing. Like, I sang in choirs, for quite a while.
Right.
And I was just talking to Deborah about this, how in the choral setting, you've got to be aware of your consonants and your vowels, and very intentional and deliberate about the way you use your voice. So maybe that has carried over into everyday life.
For you.
Yeah, I haven't sung in choirs for a little while, but it was an interesting space to be because I would join the choral group at the university where we were singing all kinds of contemporary stuff, not just secular, not just sacred, but also secular music. And so it was a freeing place to be because I could value the music and the art of people like Brahms or Bach.
Yeah.
The people that were for so many years grounded in theology and in church life and who were paid by the church to make music and appreciate them as artists. We were singing because of the music and the study, not because of God per se, even though God was in the lyrics. That was an interesting place to learn cadence, among other things, but also one of those many particular communities that became helpful.
Yeah. Boy, and it's so easy to form community with people that you're singing with because there's hardly anything more powerful than standing shoulder to shoulder and raising your voices in song and feeling that bond.
That's right.
I love that, and I kind of miss that.
Yeah, but so the other flip side of that is, and I wrote about this in one of my papers in grad school, is that when you sing a song, you stop thinking, right? So it's like soldiers marching in lockstep. There's no deviation from the score.
Okay.
And so when you're in a community that's singing these songs, you can't help but internalize the music and the words and the ideas. So it's this like tool for ideology to mold people in a direction. If you can get them to sing the songs, then you've got them on your side.
Yeah. I used to say this, there's this thing that my father used to have, and it was a way of feeding the roots of a tree. And so basically it's a spear or a rod with a pointy tip, and there's holes all along the rod. You hook a hose up to the top of it, and it's kind of a T-bar. So you take both hands and you just shove it under the tree. You hook the hose up to it, and there's this canister of fertilizer, chunk of fertilizer that the water will swirl around the fertilizer and then shoot through the rod down to the roots. And my metaphor was, instead of just watering the surface or spreading fertilizer on the surface of the ground around the tree, you're actually using an instrument to take the fertilizer deeper than you would if you just on the surface. And I said, that's music, because you have these words, you have these thoughts, and if you're pedagogical at all, you're wanting to put this into the hearts of people. And you can stand there and lecture to them, or you can sing to them or get them to sing along. And it's going to deposit itself deeper in their hearts.
Yeah, it goes really deep when you put it to a melody. You don't forget that stuff. Like the songs that they drilled into us when we were kids. They're still in my head. So it's like, it worked. They got the system into my brain.
Yeah. They did. They hacked it.
Now it's like, I have to treat that as a resource somehow. Like you have to reclaim those things or put them to work. So like, well, I did that a lot in the art making, but.
One thing I really like about you, Harold, is like, I don't know if you'd ever say it in these words, is that, like we say on the podcast, you say yes to what is. You say yes, that I was raised this way. Yes, I have all these things in my head from how I was raised that I don't really agree with anymore. And yes, I'm going to make use of them. I'm going to make art from them. I'm going to learn from them. I'm going to evolve them, with my own spin. So I love, just like what you said, I think you said, you reclaim this stuff. And I think choosing to reclaim something in your history is a way of saying yes. And I'm inspired by that.
Well, thank you. I resonate with what you're saying. I suppose there are things you have to say no to as well.
Right. You're right.
Oh, for sure.
All those toxic things, right?
Yeah.
I say yes to the work of discerning what to say yes to.
Right.
That's right.
No, and that's really smart. Like for me, I'm more reactive, I think, and I'm pissed. And so like, I just want to throw away everything. I don't want to read another verse ever again. And so like, I don't know if I ever get to that point where I would open up the Bible and be like, I wonder what I can take out of this just for fun, but it inspires me that some people can do that, especially people who have been through that kind of upbringing and choose to make it valuable to them in whatever way they want to make it valuable instead of what we were told.
Yeah, like what I'm interested in, like what voices can we center other than, let's say, all of the men who wrote the Bible. So there are all of these women in the scriptures who don't get enough attention.
Yeah.
There are people who have like written from their point of view, and I think that's a productive thing to do. It's like,
Sure.
Like artists or like writers.
A PhD thesis could be that easily.
I'll send you a few links, Marie.
Cool. I think I just listened to an interview on some other podcast. I can't remember what it was, but there was a writer who wrote a book about God traveling through time, and he's actually just an asshole, and like he's traveling with this one woman that he's stuck in jail with for some reason, and he brings her back to watch Abraham almost kill his son. And like it's this alternative biblical fiction that I find really interesting, which is, it kind of reminds me of what you just said about like writing these fictional stories from these smaller characters' points of view. I think that would be super interesting to read.
Yeah, well, they do that on Sunday School Dropouts. You know the podcast.
No, I didn't know that.
They even turned it into a role playing game, I guess. So,
Really? Sunday
check it out.
school. Sunday school dropouts. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and just as a side, the podcast that you're referring to, Marie, was this one, and it was it was an episode with Matthew O'Neill. He wrote a book called Attrition.
I'm good at my job.
No, it's all good. I get them. We all listen to so many shows that we get lost on where we found them. And speaking of other shows, my favorite show, Harold, is WTF with Mark Maron, and he himself is kind of a cat adopter and rescuer. And I know I read from your bio that's you have some involvement with that. Talk about that.
yeah, so cats evolved alongside of humans, and it's like, who is adopting whom? They found a way to get by in life without having to hunt for food. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, they're pretty damn smart.
Here we are providing for their every need.
As they nap the day away.
But it's great. We have, so Toronto Cat Rescue has like 900 foster homes in the region.
Wow.
And we're on that list. And so just yesterday, we finished up with a foster, and Masha was adopted by another couple in Toronto. So it's rewarding to see that.
Yeah, I used to foster cats too, Harold. I haven't done it in maybe like 2 years now, maybe. But I think we did a total of I think I counted it, and it was maybe about 50 cats altogether over a couple of years. It is so satisfying and so fun. And we mostly did kittens. Do you guys do kittens or like also adults or just whoever needs help?
Yeah, it's whoever. We haven't had kittens yet. But
No? Oh, well, that's good because most people want kittens. And so then somebody's got to take care of those adults.
Yeah, some of them have health concerns. And so those are the ones we've been leaning towards.
Yeah.
So from your bio, it sounds like Deborah was somewhat of a curator of guiding you into pop culture.
Yeah.
I was reading, like we often ask, what TV or movies or such. And in your bio, you listed, as far as streaming, RuPaul, House of Cards, Westworld, Black Mirror, which I love. I love all of these, but and then The Sinner. I haven't ever seen The Sinner.
We just finished that series.
Okay.
That was pretty intense. But yeah, I didn't grow up with television, so I had to build this appreciation over time. In Black Mirror, there are these robot dogs.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I haven't seen that episode yet.
Those things are crazy scary.
But so there's a company that's like building these robots, shall we say, in the real world.
Yeah, I've seen the videos. you can try to knock them down and they don't fall.
Ooh.
Yeah, so like I like how Black Mirror provokes questions about kind of where we're going.
Where this is going. Absolutely.
And that's what we need.
Yeah,
These are the stories that we need to pay attention to, more so than whether Elisha can make an axe head float on the water, you know?
So, like, I know all the stories are very different on Black Mirror, and they all say very different things, but all the same, do you have a favorite episode that you've seen so far, or maybe one that made you think more deeply than another?
Well, there's the social credit system that comes up.
Yeah,
and
that's a big one.
And of course, that is being implemented in other parts of the world.
In China, I think?
To some extent on this continent as well, although maybe in a less explicit way. The tools that we use for communicating have also become tools for surveillance. Well, we knew this was going on before people like Snowden made it clear to us, but there's an immense amount of surveillance going on. And so the way that empowers all kinds of, let's say, nefarious groups of people to coerce others to do what they want. I mean, it's frightening. But people are also creative, and I think they'll find solutions to that.
Yeah.
To navigate it. And maybe there's a way to participate in that effort. What kind of a society do you want to build?
Right.
Maybe one where it's okay to actually say what you think, but also one where we have an equal playing field.
Right.
Equality.
Right.
And in Ontario right now, we've elected a conservative government. And so the talking points about free speech and equality kind of surface. And so it's important that we think about where we land on those things. The TV shows are helpful.
Absolutely.
They give us a starting point to think it through. It's like thinking out loud. And so like I resonate with the creative practice of it. You probably know of the Handmaid's Tale, which is based on Margaret Atwood, the Canadian author's novel. Well, they filmed most of that in Toronto and the surrounding area. So we like go by these places and then we recognize scenes from the film. So it's like the stories that happen in this pop cultural universe have a very real resonance. It's like they matter somehow.
Yeah.
Almost in the way that Bible stories used to matter.
Right. This might be like a bit of a tangent, but this reminds me of this idea that I had recently. I've gotten into filmmaking in the last couple of years because I'm a photographer and my husband's a filmmaker. And so by osmosis, I've figured it out and I'm starting to make films now and then. And I think the first experience in my life where I learned to start thinking about things more critically was in getting my psychology degree and taking a class in statistical analysis.
Wow.
And then I think, the next big step was making films has really helped me to start thinking more critically because now I know what goes into creating a film. Like, I think maybe as a former religious person, I find it more easily to just get lost in a story and not even think critically about this story and what the message is that they're trying to convey. I just consume it. I just eat up the reality and just absorb it. And I think by making films, you see that there was some very intentional thought about how they're going to make this, what the message is going to be. And that's made me a lot more critical of the kind of media that I consume. And so I say this because maybe things like Black Mirror might not have hit me so hard or caused me to reflect on myself and my own society had not I, had the opportunity to be involved in filmmaking and to start thinking critically about what these writers and directors were thinking as they put this together. So it's kind of a tangent, but that's kind of something that brought up for me.
Do you like watching the making of? When they do a film, they sometimes release that as an add-on on the DVD.
Yeah, like a behind the scenes. Yeah, totally. I love that.
Yeah, for some people it ruins the experience.
I could see that.
It's like creationism. So, the world is 6,000 years old. But what about the starlight? Oh, don't worry about the starlight. God has it in his hands.
Yeah.
And so, but then you look at standard candles and the way we establish the age of things, and you understand that it deepens the mystery and the wonder,
Yeah.
rather than subtracting from whatever stability you might have imagined existed in the narrative as such. So then being involved in the creative process is like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so having driven by a spot where you recognize it from Handmaid's Tale, or seeing it, the making of on the DVD, and allowing yourself to, I think, what we call suspend illusion or something, to where it's like, I don't want to, I mean, we see flaws in the middle of a movie. We'll see the boom mic, come into view or something. And we're like, oh, you just popped my fantasy, because I was completely enraptured. And now I'm back down to earth. Thank you very much. But what I hear you saying, Harold, is that you've embraced and actually even celebrated the fact that, say, for example, Handmaid's Tale was not filmed on Mars. It was filmed in Toronto. I mean, it's coming from me. It's coming from within. It's coming from the earth, not from without. And that's the difference between, I think, a realist and a religionist, is that we like the fact that the story, the narrative's coming from without, from supernatural. And then there's those of us who said, no, it's coming from natural, and I like that better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you become part of the conversation. We're all creative. So the story can be told, but it can be retold or remade. So like you don't have to be stuck with a narrative, like substitutionary atonement, which is basically just scapegoating.
Right.
You don't have to stay with that. You can reimagine what the narrative is.
Have you ever studied improv?
No, I have not.
Okay, so improv is basically you have a group of people on stage, and they literally have no idea what they're about to do, but they're going to do a sketch, they're going to do a skit, they're going to do a role-playing thing. Oftentimes they'll just ask somebody in the audience, give me a subject, and then they just take off. And the rule for all the players on stage is you never say no. You always have to say yes and I don't mean verbally, but like mentally. If somebody, for example, they imaginarily hold up their hand in the shape of a gun and, hold you up at gunpoint. Well, you will kill the skit if you say, that's not a real gun. If you say no to their imaginations, or by saying yes and you say, yes, that's a gun, and you fall to the ground or something, you keep the conversation going. And what I hear you saying, and we've already mentioned it about yes saying earlier, but instead of saying no to the creation story or scapegoating and some of these horrific things that in and of themselves can be toxic to the human psyche, you say yes and you take,
No, that's right.
That's what I see you doing with your art.
That's right. I think like creationism, I can laugh about.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the climate change thing that I'm more concerned with, and maybe the one leads to the other. I'm not sure. There's a general anti-science mindset that I can't quite pin down where it comes from.
Oh, I'll tell you, it's a kind of an easy one. It's God's in control.
But it's funny, like my father taught me so much about astronomy and geology, and yet remains a creationist. And it's like he has this massive atlas collection and inspired me to do all of this work in developing my creativity. So it's the dissonance of like this paradigm, but then there's I don't know, you can find gems within it. And like people have different uses they put these ideas to use. It's not like it's true or false. It just works for them in a particular setting.
Well, you said you're a whistler. I too am a whistler, and my father was a whistler. It was almost a generational thing. And people, if I'm walking around and I'm whistling, people look at me funny. But I think it's a part of my DNA. Do you think you inherited your propensity to whistle?
I did. My grandfather whistled on the farm in Holland. He would always be whistling these psalms that were set to Genevan melodies. Geneva, Switzerland, where John Calvin is from. It's funny because I did spend a year in Switzerland living in Geneva. I did an internship there with the World Council of Churches, and that ecumenical world kind of opened a lot of new thought patterns for me, doing a critical Bible study for the first time. And looking at Proverbs 31 through the lens of, well, maybe this is a little patriarchal.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's funny how that's celebrated by women in the church. And you get outside the church, you look at it through a different lens, and you're like, hell no. Well, Harold, we're going to wrap it up. I really appreciate you coming on. And where can people see your art?
So I've got the artworks up on my blog. It's called In Situ.
Okay.
That's a Latin phrase, but also Arabic, depending on how you spell it. So I spell it the Arabic way, NSITU.ca.
And what does that mean?
Well, it came up for me in art history, which I studied during my undergraduate. It refers to something site-specific. So if you were visiting the Sistine Chapel, then Michelangelo's work would be considered in situ, painted on site.
Oh.
I like that idea of being in a particular place and responding to what is already there. In Arabic, it has a very different meaning. Has to do in Arabic with forgetfulness. And so so the blog is called Selective Memory for that reason.
Do you have any last, anything you want to say? You feel good about our talk?
Well, so it's the rabbit hole, right, that Alice goes down. And the line is curiouser and curiouser. And I love that phrase because curious can mean strange, but it can also mean like inquisitive.
Yeah.
And so you can stay curious in both of those meanings.
Awesome.
I think that would be my concluding encouragement.
I love it.
Yeah. You seem to always take the high road. And you and people like you are a drink of cold water for me.
In a good way.
Yeah. And I like in a humanity. I'm so frustrated and disappointed in humanity that when I see one shine like you, I'm like, okay, we're gonna be all right.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are all right too.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's our talk with Harold Sikkema. My thanks to Harold for coming on and sharing his story. My thanks to Marie for co-hosting and all the work she does for the show. My experience with Harold was fascinating, really. I mean, here's what I think about the human race. I mean, I know everybody is different. Everybody brings themselves. I think there's something fucking miraculous about consciousness, existence, breathing in and out, that what it means to be human and alive. And when I meet somebody unlike anybody I've ever met before, then I know or I feel that I'm onto something, that, there's almost like an entomologist discovering a bug that's never been discovered before, or at least one that he or she's never seen before. And I don't know. I was moved and stretched by Harold's person. The other thing that I think is amazing is when humans are unashamed to be themselves. Because in a way, Harold is, like I just said, he's very different. He's different than anybody I've ever met before. And yet, I didn't sense that he was insecure about his difference. I didn't sense that he was scared to be on the show or be himself. I mean, like, a lot of times we have people on, and I'm 9 times out of 10, they're really nervous. I didn't sense that with Harold. Not that people that are nervous are insecure. We're all insecure, but there was just something about his forthrightness to say, here I am. This is it. This is me. And I'm unashamed and unafraid, and let's talk. And his ideas, his perspective, the way he spins things. The word spin came up several times as far as looking at something a little bit differently. Stepping to your right or to your left and looking at it differently. That's the permission that I feel like Harold was giving us all. One thing that Harold does, and you'll see this in his art, is the study of spirals. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Pi. I highly recommend it. It's a real art film, but pi is amazing. 3.14 and all these digits, and you can go millions of digits into that past the decimal point, and you're never going to see a sequence. And there's something about that to me, and maybe this is my old, religionist mind looking for God, but there's something very divine about that there's just no sequence. You can't box this thing in. And whenever I did believe in God, I knew that was something that I held dear, is that this is ineffable. This is unknowable. And I didn't know how uncomfortable I was with certainty, but now that I'd look back on it, just anytime a person, whether it's the Bible or even just a human being, in the 21st century, thinks they know God. When you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha. That always appealed to me as far as just how ineffable and unknowable and unimaginable the divine must be. I mean, so anyway, in the movie Pi, there's this thing called the golden rectangle, golden ratio, and it spins around and makes a spiral. There's, the Fibonacci series, which is a series of numbers that each number is the sum of the two preceding ones, and it's a sequence. And, I don't know, there's just something about math and the circle, and even more so the spiral, that is, there's something to that, in that it's the meaning of life. It's the answer to everything, and yet it's not an answer, and you'll never know the answer. And because of that, it's almost like the expanding universe. It's like this spiral just keeps spiraling out, and nobody can contain it. Nobody can own it. And it's, if I were a believer, it would be, God is pi. That's my religion, is I'm a pianist. All right. So we're in the middle of some transition here, if you can't tell, with Marie coming on and us going to every 2 weeks rather than weekly. I just left my job at Vanderbilt. Let's be honest, I was fired. But I knew it was coming, and I was just trying to last as long as I could. There was a supervisor there that was out to get me. And if you know this, in any employer, if they want you gone, they're going to figure out a way to do it by the book so that there's no repercussions. And that's fine. It ended up being the greatest thing that could have happened to me. And so I'm good things are happening, but I might end up being self-employed. I've got a little private company that I've had for 10 years, and it's doing well. And if I just gave it a little more attention, I think it could probably double or triple in revenue. And but it also might give me more time to go back to a weekly show. I don't know, because I don't like how backed up we are. We are literally booked till like September of next year. And that's mostly because Marie is on a mission. I've been on 6 shows since she came on like a month ago. I was the guest on 6 shows, and then we've got a lot going on, and I don't know. It's just exciting. I don't know where this is going. Again, thanks to Marie and Harold for today's episode. We'll talk to you next week, or 2 weeks. Bye-bye.